One more thing I want to talk about is managers. You might be familiar with these different contexts that we have in Houdini. So for example, we're currently in the OBJ context. Then we have, for example, mat and channels, ch, shops, and so on, mat for materials. So what I can do actually is we can, instead of changing to, for example, the mat context, let's say we add in the material palette, maybe we add this black rubber or something in here, right? And we now go to that mat context. This black rubber will appear here. But one thing we can do is we can, instead of going back and forth like that, we can actually use managers. So I'll press tab and I'll go to managers, this manager section, and you'll see we have various things like material network and ROP network and so on. So for example, material network, I can drop down one here. And then if I go into this, we won't have anything in here. But what I can do is in the material palette again, maybe I'll add a different material like concrete, for example, but I don't want to add it under mat. You'll see we have the /mat section. I want to add it under this /object /mat net1. I want to drag and drop that concrete into here. And then if we go back way up, we have OBJ, we have this new mat network one. If I click on that, this concrete will now, the shader will now appear right here. Okay, this helps with keeping organized and various other things. This is not the only one. For example, we can do render, create render node, mantra PBR, and that's great. But now we have to go to the out section here, and we have the, for rendering, we have the mantra nodes here. Instead, we can go to OBJ, press tab, go to managers, and we have now ROP network. Place that down, and I can go inside, tab, mantra, and drop that down. And now if I go to this render view, it will show /out mantra IPR. This is where we change the things like the camera and the render here. Okay, so we have out mantra 1 and the one we created, which was /obj /ropnet1 /mantra 1. And now this will use this node with whatever settings we have here. Okay, you can see change the render settings and so forth. And of course you select your camera here as well, which I don't think we have a camera right now. No, we don't. But in any case, this is just an example. And you also have the ability to create these managers inside other managers. So for example, inside one of these geometry nodes, let's go into this one for example, you can actually create one of those managers as well. So press tab and go up to managers, and you can select again material network or the ROP network. So it all depends, in this case you can keep things organized. So again, if you go to material palette now, you'll have one that's called /obj geometry 1, which is that geometry folder, which you probably should have called something man or something, right? And matnet1. And the same goes for this ROPnet, which we don't have anything in there right now. So this helps us keep, our networks organized. So this is one thing that I like about Houdini. It's very customizable. It can work the way you want. And this is one example of that. One other thing is that you also have one in Dynamics. If I can find it, here's Dynamics. You have the top network as well. So again, managers, you have your managers here, and then you have under Dynamics, you also have this top network. If you don't know what all of those are right now, that's fine. You'll learn more about what those are and what you can do in those contexts as you go along. But then you'll see some people work this way in maybe webinars and so forth. So this is to help you so that you don't get confused when you watch those tutorials or when you decide to actually go on your own and work in Houdini, that you have options to work the way you want, basically. So I hope that's useful. Okay, in this section, I want to talk about a few things that I could have mentioned in the previous episode, but I'll continue with that here. And this was brought up by a viewer, Werner, which basically talks about the TopoBuild node and how you can use that instead of the edit node for basically a more destructive workflow. So if you want to snap points together, for example, it will fuse automatically, so you don't have to use the fuse node, and so on. So there are a few things that we'll talk about. And a quick note on this is, if you have a few tips, either that I do not cover or something like that, relating to a topic that I have covered in a video, feel free to share those tips in the comment section, and you might get featured in one of my episodes. I will link you to one of the webinars by Fiona Wong, which is called Concepting Hard Surface Geometry in Houdini, where Fiona basically went through the process of concepting and modeling a weapon in Houdini, and she also uses the TopoBuild node for modeling. So you can check this out if you want. It's also a quick overview of the process. It doesn't go into too much detail, but I'm sure it will be interesting to you if you are interested in modeling, hard surface modeling in Houdini. So I'll jump back into Houdini, and here I have the geometry that we worked with before in the previous episode. So it's just a box, and then I do 2 edge loops across like this, and then I extrude that polygon to get this shape. You can start with something else, of course. Now, a few things here is, let's say I want to collapse these edges, right? So what I can do is I can go in and select the edge, and then under the polygon tab we have edge collapse. We have that as an option. So again, that's the edge collapse option. So that's one thing that we have not discussed yet. And as you can see in my node network here, it drops down the edge collapse node. I'll just delete those, and I'll select an edge again. And if you press delete, you'll see that this will drop down a dissolve node to delete that edge, to remove that edge right there, right? Another quick tip, I'll just undo this, and I'll select this primitive down here, and I'll press delete, and you'll see that to delete primitives or polygons in Houdini, you'll need the blast node. The blast node will delete polygons. Now, as I do that, each time it will drop down a node, right? But a more kind of destructive workflow would be possible if you use the TopoBuild node for this, for some of these operations. Not all of them, of course, but some of the operations can be performed in the TopoBuild node. So just to demonstrate this, I'll drag off from this last node, which is polyextrude, and I'll drop down a TopoBuild node. The TopoBuild tool is usually used for retopologizing your mesh or remeshing, really high poly count meshes, maybe things like 3D scans or so forth. You bring that in, you do manual retopology on that with the TopoBuild toolset in Houdini. But Houdini is very flexible, as we'll see here, because with this TopoBuild node, I can actually use this to model and use the functionality on my geometry here, not just use this for retopology. So what I can do here is I can actually, with the build tool active, I can simply left click and drag and snap these together. Now if you remember, if you watched the previous episode, what we want to do here is we want to reduce the poly count on this object because it's not optimized currently. We have many of these polygons or primitives that we do not use for anything. Really basic example, but anyways. So we can then snap these together like this, right? Now previously, Okay, something like this. So previously we had to use the fuse node to fuse points. Now with the TopoBuild node, this happens automatically. So we don't need to fuse things. As you can see, if I go into the poly extrude, this previous node, I can just middle click on that, middle mouse button, and you'll see that we have points 36, 34 primitives, vertices 136. But in this TopoBuild right now we now have 23 points, vertices has been reduced to 90, primitives has been reduced to 24. Okay, so again, points has been reduced as well, so we don't have to go and merge or use the fuse node to fuse points together. That's not the only thing though. We can, if I undo that, because again, this is a destructive workflow basically. So previously you would use maybe the edit node, the fuse node, so forth. Whereas here we do all of those operations within this one node. So if you're looking for a more destructive workflow, I guess, this TopoBuild is one of those options. Maybe we'll see more of those in the future. But another example, we looked previously at how we can basically collapse edges like this. So in here with, again, the build tool active, we can right click and we can say collapse to point, or you can press Shift X as well. Again, select that edge, right click, collapse to point. Also, you'll notice you have other options such as make circle, evenly spaced selection, straighten selection, and so forth, which I have not yet covered. You have make circle, for example, in the edit node as well as things like straighten and evenly space. But as you can see, you have those in the TopoBuild node, which typically, again, is used for retopology. But as you can see, as I just demonstrated, you can actually use this for polygon modeling. So another interesting thing is you can actually bring up a floating parameters window. So these parameters, again, as I select a different node, those change accordingly, and it shows the options relating to a specific node that I have selected. Now, you can, firstly, if you press P, it will show parameter dialog in your network editor right here. Okay, this is useful if you maximize this thing, for example. Okay, then you have all the parameters right here. Okay, so I'll minimize that again. So that's useful, again pressing P. You can also go to Tools and show parameter dialog, or press the P key, as I said. So that's useful, but what you can also do is you can bring up a floating parameters window, and you do that by right-clicking on a node, and then you go to Parameters and Channels, and Parameters. And as you can see, this brings up this window, okay, Parameters window. And what's useful here is I can then select another node, and this whole section here will change, but this stays persistent. So I can compare, my settings and so forth between these two. So I hope that's useful. So we have this menu here, the tool options, which is what I want to talk about here. Now, as you can see, it says create at object level, create in context, keep original objects, and so on. We'll talk about these two toggles right here for now. So as we create an object, right in the create menu, we have box and all of this. I'll click on box, click in my viewport, and this will create this geometry. If I go inside of this, you'll see this geometry right here. Now, currently this is again set to create at object level. So if I use this tool at the top here, again, box or let's say I create a tube in my scene. Because it's set to object level, this will create the new object in a new container at the object level. So in my scene, it will basically place down a new container, and in this case, it's a tube, right, with this tube geometry in it. So that might not be what we want. We might want to actually create the geometry within an already existing container. So I'll delete the tube object, And I'll switch this tool options to create in context. And now if I add the tube in here, you'll see it creates that tube in the current context. So if I jump up to the object level, again, the tool options is set to create in context. So if I add a tube in here somewhere, it will create a new tube object at the object level called tube object 1 with that tube geometry in it. So just in case you missed that, delete that. Again, here's our previous geometry. Okay, currently only the tube will show up because the display flag is set to that. So we can set that to box, or we can merge these or whatever. So if we again create tube geometry in our scene, it will create a new object with that tube geometry in it. And again, that is because of creating context. If we go into this tube geometry where we only have this tube, and we'll create maybe a sphere in here, you'll see that we now have both of those instead of it creating a new object. And if you want again to create at object level instead of this context here, we can just switch that, and maybe if we create a torus now, that will create it again at the object level. There are many user preferences in Houdini, so you can, for example, go to Edit, Preferences. Okay, you have many preferences here. So save and load options, for example. And if you open one of these, you can again click through here, this drop down, to get to some of the other settings. Save and load options, I prefer this setting here, increment file name, which will increment your save file. So I have basically version 1, version 2, and so forth. But that's a personal preference, and again, there are many of these settings that you can change. Also, things like open start here pane at startup, for example, I'll turn that off. So if you close Houdini and open it up again, and you go into preferences, and again save and load options, you'll see it's still, this change is still here. Again, as you make a change, you probably want to hit apply. And so you have your user preferences, right, that you set, and maybe you create new desktops and things like that, and various other settings kind of as you go along. So I'll close out of Houdini again, and in my documents, you can say I have different Houdini versions. So Houdini 16. So if I want to delete my user preferences and basically start from scratch, I want Houdini to start up as it would with a fresh install, basically, then I'll select this folder, in this case Houdini 16.5, and I'll press delete. I'll just delete that folder, and I'll open up Houdini again, and it's actually opened up here, and you'll see that this statistics things comes up again, and I'll just say OK, and the start here comes up again as well, and I'll close this. Previously, if you remembered, I unticked this option where I said open start here pane, okay, and I also have under edit, preferences, save and load options, you'll see it's set back to make numbered backups, and so I'll just set that the way I want again. In my folder here, I'll right click in here and I'll refresh, and you'll see if you refresh this page, as you can see, your folder will show back up again, so it'll create that folder again. So that's one way, okay, of getting rid of your preferences, deleting this folder. As you start up Houdini again, it'll create the relevant folder, and again, in my case, this is in my documents. So under my PC, documents, so I have a few other things, and then I have these Houdini files. Okay, so that's a quick look at deleting your preferences and starting basically with a fresh startup of Houdini. I would not do that, every time I start up Houdini, but only really if you feel like that is something that you kind of have to do, because you messed up something, maybe with your preferences. So yeah, that's it for that. I hope you find that useful.